Thanks. Thanks for coming. I always get up here and I get really nervous and I forget to say thank you. So thank you to Wyatt and Megan and Adam and the staff and all the faculty and all of you for coming. It's nice to look out here and see familiar faces and new faces. I'm going to read one old poem, and then I'm going to read new poems. I have a book. My most recent book is about a woman named Winona Stone, and she's been in my life for a while, so I've been sort of trying to push her out little by little. People will ask me how Winona is, and I give them different answers. Sometimes I say that she's dead. Sometimes I say that she's moved to Alaska. But this is one of the last poems in the book, and it's called Deleted Scenes. And so in this book, it's kind of about Winona's sort of going through a hard time, and so nothing's really going right for her. But towards the end of the book, there's a poem called Deleted Scenes where you see all of the things that might have happened. So I thought that was a good little glimpse of Winona. The town that she lives in is called Pleasant Bluff. So when I mention Pleasant Bluff, that's what that is. Deleted Scenes. Winona carrying the torch. Winona on a float. Winona in a sandwich board with one side urging, vote Winona, and the other, don't. Winona as the star of Winona Stone the musical, playing her avatar. Winona close to victory. Winona in a crown. Winona hidden, fiddling as Pleasant Bluff burns down. Winona on a unicycle. Winona going pro. Winona someplace tropical, the weatherman in tow. Or catapulted 0G to reach a future date when, opening her time machine, she sets the record straight. Winona with a three-tier trophy, world's best boss or daughter. Winona in a life preserver, rising from the water on skis, while all aboard, the stones take off across the lake. Winona sore, but hanging on, and happy in their wake. So I'm going to read some new poems. I have been doing some weird stuff, but so I'm going to work the weird stuff in, hopefully between some things that are more digestible. But this is a digestible one, I think. This is called Jocks, and I've been playing a little bit with the first person plural with these voices, this we voice. I'm kind of thinking about who makes a we. I also thought this was a good one to start with because I missed the basketball game today. I haven't heard how it went, but it was at 1 o'clock, and I thought that was probably a little bit close if you're reading at 3 to go pick up basketball, but I hope it went well. If anyone, probably no one that was at the game is here because they're, oh, yeah. But so this is called Jocks, and there's a sort of a joke in here that when I was younger, I played basketball, and we did this kind of wicked thing that teenage girls do to anybody that's not a teenage girl, where we would be stretching, and you know how you count the stretches, and we would say, when we would get to 6, we would say sex instead of 6, and then we would watch people kind of go, did they just say sex? Like that whole team of girls that's counting. And we like to think that we were making people uncomfortable. I don't know if we were or not, but that joke that joke comes up in here. Jocks. The back row in American history, already wearing away uniforms under our warm-ups, popping purple gum. Some of us in lipstick stolen from our mothers, others mistaken for our younger brothers, with buzz cuts, cornrows, jacked up ponytails. We didn't care about the presidents. We cut out early in a seamless blitz of nylon sheen. Our thighs were staggering, our stretches legendary, counting 4, 5, sex. We swore we saw the bleachers flinch. We licked our palms and rubbed our sneakers clean and couldn't stand the Pentecostal teams with their set shots and culottes. What was worse than modesty? And who could top our coach, destroying clipboards, screaming, "Get your man," whose fury was the only compliment we'd ever trusted. Most of us believed that suffrage meant collective suffering. We weren't discerning, but we weren't unsure. Our trick plays worked. We wore each other's sweat. Our pregnant captain didn't know it yet. I didn't really think of that as a funny poem, but I like it's always nice to get a reaction. This is another wee poem, and I was going through a phase of being really stuck, and so my answer to being stuck was to give myself these absurd, intense kinds of formal constraints. I keep trying to find a way to talk about it that makes it seem like I was doing something really smart, but it really was just that I needed a way to not be stuck. But so the constraint here is that I could only use words whose vowel was E. The E is the only vowel. There is a Y. Sometimes there's a Y. I have a colleague, this poem came out in a magazine in the spring, and he emailed me, and he just said, "Saw the Y." And I was like, thank you. I knew you would. But this is called When We Were Shepherds. We weren't the best. We merely needed fleece. Were the sheep well bred? Yes. Fed? Frequently. Yet they grew depressed. Wherever they went, bellwethers, rebels, they preferred elsewhere. They'd never even left West Tennessee. They deserved better. Hence, we leveled trees, extended fences, pledged fresh scenery. When the creek melted, there'd be plenty weeds. We sweetened them, see? Were they restless? Yes. They knew they weren't free, yet the center held. We were very blessed. This is the last of the wee poems for now. I was thinking kind of loosely when I was working on this one about that Steubenville case that was, now it's been several years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where there was a high school girl and she was sexually assaulted by a couple of football players. Do you guys remember this? And it was in Ohio. And I was thinking about, one of the things that came out is that there were several other teenage girls that were there when this was happening, and they didn't do anything. And so I was thinking kind of about their voice when I made this one. It's called Testimony. Numbed up from rum and slushies, smoking bowls in our friend's backyard, times a minor chord, the night keeps playing. Dude, we need to go, we say, but don't. We're good at being bored in front of everyone. But cross our hearts, the worst we ever feel is indiscreet. Downloading, checking Tinder, taking shots for an album called More Pictures of Our Feet. It's August, nothing left to talk about but June, when we were tan and got along. Instead of laughing at a girl who's not our friend or year, just some dumb, stumbling pawn the night keeps playing. Dude, we need to go, we say, then get the liquor from our trunk. We can't remember having so much fun, though most of us are almost way too drunk. Downloading, checking Tinder, taking shots of 3 guys peeling off a halter top. Numbed up from rum and slushies, smoking bowls, we never wonder should we make them stop, instead of laughing at the girl who's not, who's passed out galaxies away by now in front of everyone. But cross our hearts, it makes us super sick, admitting how we can't remember having so much fun. That's just the sort of muddle summer was. It's August, nothing left to talk about, but what will happen after nothing does. So a couple of years ago, I was asked to contribute a poem to this anthology called The Book of Scented Things. And the idea was that they would mail you a little vial of perfume, and then you would smell it and you would write a poem. And I was like, I don't know, but okay, I can do this, I guess. And it was it's a great anthology. It's full of really wonderful poems by really wonderful poets. I had a hard time with the assignment. I'm not really a perfume person. And I would smell the vial, and all I could think of was old ladies playing bridge. Every time I would be like, well, can I write a poem about this? And I would smell it. The name of the perfume I got was Rose Water and Vanilla. And I hope nobody in here wears rose water and vanilla. It hadn't occurred to me until just now. But, I mean, it's just, I'm not a perfume person. So, anyway, the poem was due, and I was like, I have to figure something out. So I wrote, she wore rose water and vanilla. I wrote that line, and then I thought, I wonder if I can make a poem where every line is an anagram for that line. Like, every line only uses those letters. And so I did, and this is the poem. It could be called Ladies Playing Bridge, but I called it Redolent. She wore rosewater and vanilla. She wore an heir's vow, all right, all anther and sorrow. A wise Eve, a variant. She wore eros well, or was ethereal in love's war. She wore a rose all a-wilt, raven and real ravish, wore stolen all, seawater, ravines, and hollower weather, wore roses and vanilla, and her answer was to royal, leave a slow verse, a trail nowhere. So that started me down a very long and windy road of writing these anagram poems, which I think I'm finally done with. But what I liked about doing that poem was that it was such an intense constraint that it felt a little bit magical when you could make it work. It felt like the lines were telling me things that I didn't totally understand. And so I started to think of these poems as oracles, because they were oracular in a way. So this is the second one of these I wrote, and it's called How to Read a Busted Oracle. Begin with omens, a match, a levee story, a moving sea or city, the news, the blame. Begin with math, every loss once a meta gain. Each TV lie at memory's behest, now besting real time's heavy cam. When too rashly we bet on magic themes, naive to thin regimes, let's maybe not have a cow. Given a myth, let's reboot the all machines again. Vow to celebrate the semi-hymns, woven, breathy, elegiac, as this moment becomes another myth we live against. Mark Jarman the other night read two really great Fox poems, and so I wanted to read. I may read two. I'm definitely going to read this one. This is one of my Fox poems, and because it's me, I had to anthropomorphize the fox a lot. I couldn't just have the fox in the poem. Somebody actually wrote online, she really got inside this fox's head. So this is the kind of like the fox is speaking, I guess. It's called Fox Song. Also, I wrote this in Sewanee. Fox Song. The yards grow ghosts. Between the limbs and wings, bleached streetlit things, I'm best at moving on. Hunt heavy, gray, slunk over low, like so much weight got in the way. My shape's the shape of something missed, flash pop or empty frame. Though you could say I've made a game of this, and though mid-trickery it might be true, when evening lingers in the key of leaving, my senses swoon. A synonym for stay, I'm always coming back. I chew through traps. I love whatever doesn't get too close. This one's a little long. I always feel like I should give a warning before I read a long poem. And it's called juvenilia, this word I'm sure we all know, for a poet, writer, or artist, early kind of younger work. And I think it's thinking about that in many ways. Juvenilia. Up front, the wasted girl said, "Turn off, y'all. Let's gun it down the runway." No joke, hey, I've done this tons of times. And listen. That we didn't listen was the one right thing about our night. The country airport winking as we passed, half spun in a borrowed car with a guy called Nuh-uh at the wheel. We never said his real name. He didn't have a license. He wore a backpack full of pills, and that was all I really knew about him. Just a friend of a friend I spent a very crummy fall with years ago when I was living next to Bert's Bird Barn, a chicken farm, the stink so thick it got in all my sweaters. This was where I landed after my boyfriend came unglued and drained his savings at the world's longest yard sale. Hauled home a fencing mask, a two-man saw, a busted Huffy, several crates of jars, and a painting of a rebel general, he guessed, based on the cold, proud stare alone. And that's just the first load. He'd given up hygiene. He started seeing things in trees. And there went our big plan to move to Arizona, which was his plan anyway. I kept surrendering my uncertainty to more uncertain forces, like an echo caught in louder sound, though people thought I was a lot of fun, up for anything and so on. I still slept in my retainers. My ears were triple pierced. It was an in-between time. Parked behind a counter, making lunch till dinner, I wore my apron tight and gave away too much food, reeking of grease and my own stale air and pretending to like jam bands. This was the fall I started writing poems that rhyme, inventing characters with more resolve, or else like me, but men. And it's hard to think about how sad I was, how willing to forget myself and my luck, too many buggy nights, like the night when Nuh-uh drove us, straddling the yellow line, his whole arm out the window, reaching to catch the weeds or high beams, something over and over he kept missing. They found him dead in a hotel room in Nashville 3 weeks later. We slammed beers on the way to the visitation. I stood in line and shook his father's hand, absorbing the scene like evidence of a crime I helped commit. Though I'd have the means to move away by winter, if not the sense to see how much I wasn't fixing, that fall in the damp, death-smelling house, I wrote a poem about a woman named Miranda. Miranda was standing, where else? On a veranda, discussing the mating habits of mosquitoes. I used a bunch of scientific terms. I did the research from my mattress on the floor, tapping uneven syllables, while a cat I wasn't meant to let inside eyed my hand like prey. I was trying my best not to think of them as signs, the possum in the pond, frogs mashed against the gravel by my own tires, or one of Bert's aimless sons. There were several. There was always so much traffic. When I woke to find a chicken carcass on the porch, wings folded, stiff, just like the classic gag, but dirty white instead of marigold, it was the sort of correspondence between life and art you can't anticipate. Though, of course, I wasn't thinking about art. In the poem, which probably went on too long, Miranda never left the cramped veranda, just rattled on in interlocking lines that didn't sound like anyone I knew. But what she said about biology, how little we can do to change what makes us incomplete, that was an ending I could reckon with. It was my bravest work to date. There are a lot of weird town names in Tennessee. I don't know if you have ever noticed that before, but I live in Memphis, and I always pass Bucksnort on my way here. And every time, I just really love that there's a town called Bucksnort. But I think the place names are really interesting, too, why people decide to name a town things like Stinking Creek, why you would want to name your town that. But so I was thinking, I started reading, I got a Tennessee map, and I found all of the town names that I thought were evocative in Tennessee. And I made them into a poem. It's just the names of towns in Tennessee. So it's kind of a found poem. It's kind of a list poem. And it was written in November 2016. And it's called Flyover Country. Turtletown, Cottontown, Reagantown, Trade. Pigeon Forge, Coalfield, Hurricane, Gray. Huntersville, Fisherville, Manlyville, Guys. Static, Gentry, Difficult, Bride. Shackle Island, Bone Cave, Pioneer, Swift. War Trace, Nixon, Ransom Stand, Gift. Barren Plain, Nameless, Cherokee, Pope. Campaign, White House, Purdy, New Hope. Bug Scuffle, Speedwell, Tazewell, Yell. Brick Church, Hanging Limb, Burnt Church, Bells. Little Lot, Buck Snort, Bitter End, Boone, Needmore, Prospect, Liberty, Moons. For a little while, I was reading a lot about spells, like old spells. I was reading the Greek magical papyri, which were written like the last century BC into the first 3 or 4 centuries AD. And I don't know why, except that the logic of these things is totally bizarre and wonderful, and the languages too. But they have these great titles like, divination by means of a boy. And you're like, what does that even mean? Or I wrote this one down because I thought maybe I could write this poem before this conference, but I just couldn't make it work. But to make men who have been drinking at a symposium appear to have donkey ears to outsiders. It's like, how would you even do that with a spell? But so this is a poem that's like kind of playing off of that weird language and logic, but also when you have like a problem with some device and you go on the internet and it has like a list of things that you can try to fix your whatever it is, your computer, your phone. So this is kind of joining those things together. It's called troubleshooting. Was the sturgeon not a sturgeon? Did your squid perform like an eel? You're new to this, aren't you? Do you wonder what to feel? You put a pigeon feather in your hair and marched at the 7th hour toward the rising sun. You looked ridiculous. You're always in a hurry. You skipped the section on falconry. Could you not get a hold of well water or a rat to drown? Did the oyster you fashioned from beeswax melt in the cage of your hand? Did you forget the pearl of semen? The semen was essential. Were you ho-hum with the dirge, with the wormwood and dirt? Did you sigh into your radish oil? Was the one you anointed thinking impure thoughts? Were you thinking impure thoughts? Do you know the difference? Didn't you say you were ready? Didn't you say you believed? You searched for bloodroot, settled for nettles. You mixed up the sun and the moon. You needed your God to forgive you. You needed a new God, too. A couple of years after the perfume anthology, the same people wrote me again with an idea for another anthology of still life poems. So you would make a still life, and you would take a picture of it, and then you would write a poem about it. And I also failed at this attempt. I kept trying to write a poem that was a still life, and I couldn't really make it work with actual objects. So my poem was called Still Life with Nostalgia. What is it about today of all days? No ceremony melting in your cup. No lint in the wind as the box fan shakes. No tint to the light that shuttles this ache for something as slight as crepe paper, draped, drooping from fixtures to corners and doors, like wet power lines knocked loose by a storm. for something as slow as a night wound down into cracks that map a spackled ceiling. Whole solar systems you must have explored, flipped supine, reeling with sure vertigo. You must have been there. How else would you know the way dust funneled sometimes, sunlit, up, as close to nothing as the world you miss, which isn't a world and wasn't like this. I'm going to read a couple of sonnets. This one's called via negativa. It's a phrase you may be familiar with. In Latin, literally translates to the negative way. But it's the idea of referring to something by virtue of what it isn't. And you hear this kind of in theological context, that it's impossible to talk about an idea like God, which is infinite, using only finite terms. So I was kind of thinking about that, but I was also thinking about that in terms of loss. I don't know why I do this, but I put math in my poems a lot. I think it's because I don't totally understand math, but there's this one math thing in the middle of this that's like roots for f of x. It's like the function of x. Can you picture what that looks like, f, and then the x is in parentheses? I actually have no idea anymore what that even means, but I think it makes some sense in the context of the poem. This is via negativa. There weren't 3 foxes frozen in the street. 3 seemed significant. I rounded up. So when I say, we saw 3 foxes, blue against the ice, I mean the one was brown, like farms are brown. I mean the other 2 were roots for f of x. Snow tumbled down as if the world were trying to subtract each edge and interval we counted on to show where home is. Though I've always lacked a bigger picture, once I heard you'd gone, I stood outside a while and felt complete. I couldn't find the fox, much less the street, and you were never here. I rounded up. So I'm going to read two more of these anagram poems. This one is, the line that gets spun around and reworked is borrowed from Rilke. You'll recognize it, but it doesn't come till the end. It's called Mansplaining Oracle, and it's the idea is that the oracle is kind of mansplaining, but it's also talking to a mansplainer. I actually read this poem one time, and William Logan was in the audience. And I said, everyone knows what mansplaining is, right? And William Logan said, I think you should explain. And I started to, and then he did from the back of the room. It was really great. It was a great moment. So this is Mansplaining Oracle. Hey you, untrue god, fiscal man, feudal man, sour young cad. Hey Yahoo, seducer, family gun nut, guru of Man Island, etc. Hey you, if you're glued to any such man, any moody cause fueling hurt, if you're unduly chaste among angels you unmatched, if your augury only comes haunted, if you feel your humid angst unfolding each year, you must face your unholy magnitudes, and you must change your life. And this is it's kind of a similar, this is a sort of a sonnet, I guess. It's the line that gets reworked here is Elizabeth Barrett Browning's, the first line of her famous sonnet, How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways. And so I haven't totally figured out how to read this poem yet. There are numbers that are going across the lines. It's a list of ways that someone might love somebody else. I think the best way to do it is to read the numbers, but there's 43 of them, so I'm letting you know. Her poem is called Sonnet 43. This is called 43 Sonnet. And it begins with a line from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. 1, autonomy. 2, elective howl. 3, showed teeth. 4, use the veto. 5 with hello. 6 with the wet economy. 7 clothed. 8 two-tone. 9 elusive. 10 on the way home. 11 at home. 12 coveted. 13 until we see how. 14 hotly. 15 steely hot. 16 on leave. 17 with too much we. 18 too loosely. 19 due theme. 20 in vacuo. 21 the we. 22 tentatively we. 23 somehow. 24 the loud echo. 25 the detente. 26 touchily. 27 with the wholesome vow. 28 the old way. 29 cue the wolves. 30 the emotion. 31 semi-devoutly. 32 how we once. 33 at the hotel. 34 wholesale. 35 too mute. 36 in the towed Chevy. 37 when woe lets me. 38 to the void. 39 oh acutely. 40 sweetly. 41 moved out. 42 alone. 43 with the echo. I'm going to read 2 more poems, I think. This is another sonnet. It's called Suppositions for Skeptics. Suppose we've undersold the rhapsody. More apt to graph a gap or galaxy, we've voted no on maybe. Pigeonholed our hope like so much extra seed we told ourselves we'd never need. Suppose we'd known. Just as a stream exploits the cracks in stone, fear works its witchy runnels through a brain parched hard with thought. We show up late, explain we've missed the code, or anyway the cue. Suppose we quit apologizing too, released from woe is me and unashamed of what went wrong. Suppose the signs we blamed, each score and semaphore were meant to say, go slower. Most of this will be okay. Several months ago, I attended an expo at the convention center in Memphis, which is called the Agri Center. It's mentioned in this poem. And I'd been there before. It's the kind of place where, various things move through town. I always would go for the Delta Fair, where they have my very favorite thing, which is little capuchin monkeys riding dogs. It's called the Banana Derby. It's just the best. But that is in the August and September. This was a very different kind of thing that was happening at the Agri Center. It was a survivalist expo where they sell bunkers and lots of big, huge buckets of food and tons of guns and that kind of thing. And so it was a little bit unsettling. This poem's going to kind of talk about that. But another thing that the poem mentions is very briefly, but is worth noting, is this psychological condition known as the glass delusion, which was a kind of a thing in the Middle Ages where somebody would believe that either their skin or their internal organs was made of glass, literally made of glass, and so they would be afraid of breaking, and so they would do kinds of crazy things to protect themselves. The most famous sufferer of the glass delusion was King Charles VI. But I find this fascinating. I just love the idea of that being a psychological condition. So it talks about that just a little bit later in the poem. But this is called the Survival Expo. It's mostly men inside the Agri Center, pricing seed vaults and metal shelters, knives and MREs spread over dressed-up tables like alms for fraught apostles. Take, eat. And we expected this, my friend and I, but came in anyway, for fun, I guess, except to me it feels a little like a test to prove how out of place we aren't, which I'll acknowledge is a flaw of mine. this tendency to double down, pretending things are fine, a tactical response. Like when my friend tells me she's feeling better, and all I do is compliment her hair, how thick it's growing in, how glad I am. And then I promptly get us both ensnared in a pitch for disaster rations made for pets. Tested, the rep explains, on cats, since dogs will eat whatever, but cats are picky bastards. And see, his pack will hold a month's supply, and here's a pocket for your gas masks, too. And here's a pamphlet about chemtrails, too. And it's the truth. We're sorely unprepared for even minor hazards, acts of God and whatnot, living as we do along a semi-dormant fault in Tennessee, where billboards flash with shot theology and ads that boast, yes, silencers are legal. So I can understand why there's a line for 20-minute background checks. This being a thoroughly American response to background checks and apprehension compared to, say, the Middle Ages, how King Charles VI, believing he was made of glass, sewed iron bars into his clothes and wouldn't let himself be touched and hardly moved, so scared of shattering, which just goes to show the kingdom of the self will always be the hardest to defend. I wonder what he'd think to see us here near superior illumination, lamps that burn for 40 days and charge your phone, which my friend could really use, she says, texting a picture to her husband who responds, I think you need to leave the agri-center. Then we get distracted by these cards with punch-out tools that fit inside your wallet. So if you're stranded in the wilderness or captured and have access to your wallet, you might still save yourself. What can it hurt, we say, and stand there for a while comparing options. Snare locks, fish hooks, saw blade, handcuff shim. Because you never know what you'll walk into. And the agri-center smells like kettle corn. And my friend is feeling better, done with chemo. And when I don't know what to say, I can't shut up. Just keep reloading wrong thoughts down the last packed aisles and turnstiles, back to Saturday. Appalled, of course, but not ungratified by all these ways we have to stay alive. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.